Okay, I'd like to welcome us today to the last July meeting of the IMAG MSM Working Group on Multiscale Viral Pandemics. I appreciate everybody showing up. I appreciate your patience. We have a single talk today. Our speaker is distinguished in a whole variety of ways, and he's going to be talking about one of his many areas of interest today. As always, I need to remind you that the meeting is recorded, live streamed, and publicly available. So please be aware of that. As always, we have Tom and myself here trying to shepherd things along. Jim Sluka, in charge of web administration and PR, Slack channel, and Lorenzo and Joel working on the distribution and organization of the seminar. You've seen this slide hundreds of times by now, at least 100 times. Please do help us distribute this information. Our speakers deserve a bigger audience, and so you can help us build that audience, and do help us update the IMAG MSM wiki page. We would appreciate that. And our YouTube channel has got more than 120 talks now, so please do help us distribute that as well. We have our Twitter handle, MSM Viral. Twitter only works if people redistribute it. I guess unless you're an industrialist trying to buy Twitter, in which case it's a different one. But please do help us use that MSM Viral tag to let people know what's going on. Announcements today. We are scheduled for a Immune Digital Twins subgroup meeting tomorrow, and I am standing in for Reinhardt as the host. And so if anybody thinks they should be invited to the IDT subgroup and Adam's email did not reach you and you would like to come talk tomorrow about what we would actually have to do to start building digital twins, what is the workflow, please let me know and we'll send you an invite. As always, also, we have our Google form to suggest speakers. Please let us know. Maybe Lorenzo can put that link in the chat for us, or Jim can put that link in the chat for people, trying to make it as easy as possible. Coming up next week, we have Patrick Kinnunen speaking on kinase signaling. August 11th, we have Nancy Baker. I don't have a title yet. August 18th is the dog days of August, so maybe we won't have a meeting, but if people would like to, we'd appreciate it. Lorenzo and Joel, I don't know if you want to give us, since we have time, do you want to give us a quick few word update on scheduling?
Yeah, it's still, 18 is still open. We're trying to reach people, but as you know, August is a difficult month.
That's fine. But as you've heard me say it many times, and with this audience, I don't think I need to repeat it, but since I say it every week, I'll say it again. Suggest yourselves, suggest your grad students, suggest your postdocs, suggest the people you'd like to hear. Doesn't have to be a modeler. Could be people doing everything from reporting or regulation to standards, methodologies, experiment, drug development. Do our best to get people back on board, and especially starting in the fall, we'd like to have a good lineup for this coming. Okay, I don't want to take more time from our speaker. It's late for him, and I know he would like to get to his holiday after a very long time of no holidays. So without further ado, I will turn over the floor to our speaker for today. And I should read out beforehand the disclaimer that the information and views which he is going to be presenting are not those of the European Commission.
So, well, thanks for the invitation, and thank you everyone for attending this and listening to me. It's been a pleasure to prepare this, and I hope I could do something here that triggers some interesting discussions. This is not what I work with normally, but this is something, the European Health Data Space is something that I have recently come to be part of in different settings, because of I am a member of the technical committee expert groups at ISO and the Danish standards. I am a member of the ISO TC215, which is for health informatics, and in different groups there. Danish standards, it's SDS 273, it's also health informatics. And in this these works, I have been asked to attend different meetings and panel discussions about this new legislative work or framework by the European Commission about the use of health data. So just to say briefly about what I do normally, I am a CEO and the founding partner of a medical technology company called Evoplexusmedics, and we work currently with two diseases. Main one is the chronic kidney disease, and the other one is precision dermatology, including skin cancer. The overview of this presentation would be short here, but there will be some content in there which might be a little bit diversified, but I try to narrow it down to this topic. The perspective of MedTech when it comes to European health data space. So very briefly about Evoplexusmedics and myself, the MedTech industry, what is the European health data space and why do we need it, the challenges and benefits of it, and the perspective of MedTech in relation to the European health data space. So our journey for Evoplexusmedics and myself. So I got into the AI and machine learning world about 25 years ago as an academic, although I had actually got into it very lightly already in 1991, 92. And then I got totally out of it until about 1998, and then started doing a lot of research in this field. A couple of years, or actually a year about later, I got into the world of medical devices. So together with three other colleagues, we designed one of the first pulse oximeters. At that time, to best to our knowledge, was one of the first pulse oximeters with Doppler effect, which we had come up with as a prototype. And then because I was in the AI world, I was already trying to use AI to predict various conditions and predict complications based on this biological signals that we captured with this pulse oximeter. Then I actually got in contact with somebody who had just got very severely multiple sclerosis about 21 years ago, and his condition deteriorated very severely, very quickly, and his life quality was not at all going well, deteriorating. So I designed, actually, that was the first time I came to use AI for a patient, design a system to try to help him to improve his quality of life. And continued onward there, I became at the university the director, manager for the disability support unit, which was called at that time. And we had a lot of students with dyslexia, also staff members, Asperger's syndromes, dyspraxia, mobility, hearing impairment, visual impairment, etc. That is again somewhere where I thought AI would be very beneficial, and started researching a little bit how to use and develop AI systems to help these patients, or at that time, I know we could call them patients, but they had these conditions. Then I was also working a lot researching with machine learning algorithms, and that's the time when I actually got a breakthrough with some research work, and designed a machine learning algorithm that turned out to be quite powerful in working with very high dimensional data sets and spaces, and very quickly could come up with quite powerful models. A year later, we got a European Commission project based on my machine learning algorithm. And if I remember, that was one of the first European Commission projects they had given out to a research group for autonomous vehicle guidance systems. And that was a collaboration between UK and France, and I was leading the AI part, since that was based on my machine learning algorithm. A couple of years later, I got an invitation to attend a meeting with NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And there I got to know that they were going to use my machine learning algorithm for part of the space project. So just a side note here. And around that time, I was also working with another researcher with a background from Cambridge University, and tried to apply different AI systems and machine learning algorithms to identify biomarkers. We worked a lot with gene expressions. If I remember correctly, one of the diseases we worked with was leukemia. And again, we applied my algorithm, and it turned out, when we compared with different results from around the world using same or similar data, we had got very good results. So I decided to actually file patent for this algorithm. And a couple of years later, when the project with the autonomous vehicles ended, I was actually very tired of academia. I found there was too much work, very little life. So I decided to leave. I didn't want to continue for the second phase of the project, which was to actually commercialize the results we had come up with. So coincidentally, I got a job in Denmark, moved here. And a year later, actually at that time, I had already 3 filed patents for different applications with my machine learning algorithm, and actually sold, I think, 2 licenses even before having a company. So I created a company called Evoplexus, and one of the applications actually was within healthcare and medical sector. So I started talking to different hospitals, medical doctors. In my world, to me, as coming from an academic researcher, it was clear to me that, well, this is the route we should go, and this is going to be needed in the future, and that could bring a lot of benefit to everyone. However, turned out I was actually quite wrong. I didn't realize that the real world is quite different from academic world. So I realized, actually, especially the medical sector was found it quite conservative, and it was very difficult to convince the healthcare professionals that, well, this is the route we should go. I am still facing this 20 years later. I'm sure you guys all have experienced it one way or the other. And as a newly created startup with a very innovative solution, especially within AI world, where a lot of people actually have not heard about what it is and what it can do, I realized the startup will die sooner or later, since the healthcare sector turned out to be less mature for this field. And so we went into consultancy, and especially because the healthcare professionals, after my meetings, they actually were telling me, come back in 10, 15 years. And that's, well, then I realized this is going to be a long route, and we went into consultancy. Then we started getting projects where we also applied our machine learning platform in these projects, and some of them included, for example, heart failure, abdominal aortic aneurysm, nectarizing enterocolitis, end-stage renal disease, for different hospitals or collaboration with different hospitals, private sector partners. And we did that for quite some years. Then in 2019, I realized that all the projects we do now are actually all within medical and healthcare sector, where we mainly apply our own AI platform and technologies, which actually was true, because that's exactly what the healthcare professionals were telling me, come back in 10, 15 years. And now it was actually 10 years later. And turned out that things had matured by that time. So since 2019, we have Evoplexusmedics, which is our new startup. And we work mainly with the chronic kidney disease and precision dermatology, in collaboration with different partners, hospitals, private sector partners as well, NGOs. Right now we have collaborations or representatives in about 11 countries. The last one we started with is Brazil, about 2 months ago. We were at a trade show, and we have good collaboration, and there's a market there for us, for our solution. I am also now, since a few months, member of the technical committees of ISO and Danish standard, besides being a researcher at the Reimbursement, which is the most specialized and biggest hospital here in Denmark. Sorry, that was supposed to be short journey explanation, but it became long. The MedTech industry, well, there are different definitions of it, but I thought just putting this slide up so that we hopefully can speak the same language when it comes to the definition of it. To me, when you look it up, you get always two different definitions. But to me, what it is that any product, service, or solution that uses technology to improve people's health by diagnosing, treating, monitoring, and preventing diseases. But it has to be to a level of quality, safety, reliability, etc., to be used in the medical or clinical setting or within the healthcare sector. The last couple of years, a lot of healthcare technologies have come up, and there seems to be some confusion about what it is and how it's related to medical technology or MedTech companies. But for me, the technology, the health tech companies or field is more put on the patient side, where the technology solution can be delivered or consumed outside of the clinical or hospital setting, and most of the time by the patient or the person. It could be mobile apps, for example, that monitoring and giving feedback to the patient. So now we coming to the European health data space. I don't know, I'd like to see most of the audience today are from US side, if I am not wrong. And I actually don't know how much people know about the European health data space or heard about it. But I try to give some brief description and details about it. So The European Health Data Space is a health-specific framework that tries to create common rules, common standards and practices, infrastructures, and a governance framework for the use of health data among the member states of the European Commission. Here I highlighted the use in bold because it has a distinction. So the European Health Data Space very clearly defines two uses. This is a primary use, which is the use of health data within the medical, clinical or health sector in the setting for treating, diagnosing and preventing diseases of a person. Secondary use of the data is when the health data is used for research, innovation, and policy making. So why do we need this? There are a lot of countries within Europe who have quite strong healthcare settings, healthcare sector. If we look at, for example, the Scandinavian countries, they have a very long they've been very long involved in creating strong electronic health record systems. However, now we're getting into the era of the need for more data. And we can see the benefit of the use of data, health data. So we generate huge amounts of data every day by doctors, nurses, pharmacists, researchers, public health body organizations, etc. And the data is the blood running through all the healthcare systems. So this is going to be generating more, it's going to be running the healthcare systems, it's going to be consumed, it's going to run devices, etc. And now we know that the better picture we have, the more insights we have from the data, the better job we can do. So small data sets don't resolve all problems. We also have the problem, which we all know about it, and it's been going on for some time, aging. So we collect more diseases. The older we get, we need more treatments. There are more interactions between the diseases, between the treatments, affecting diseases, etc. Then we need to have more knowledge about how we can deal with this complex situation. So the incomplete knowledge space we have currently is not enough. So we need to understand more. Besides that, we are all for going more personalized, more holistic. Our treatments or healthcare should be more evidence-based. Therefore, we need more of high-quality data. Why the European Health Data Space, and what can it solve? Why one could ask him or herself, why can't we just collaborate within the European Commission and the European Commission member states? Well, there are a lot of complex challenges when it comes to this work collaboration. There are a lot of obstacles to actually make use of the full potential of the data. The infrastructures are quite fragmented. Practices quite diverse. Standards are applied unequally. Collection, storage, and sharing of data are quite diverse. Regulations are interpreted, for example, in the GDPR sense, quite differently. Access and consent are applied or used differently. Therefore, we also cannot do without finding a solution. We cannot rely entirely on clinical trials to find solutions and answer all questions. Besides that, we want to move the center of care towards the patient. making use of more technologies with apps, wearable devices, etc. That way we get a much better picture of the health of the individual, besides the actual diseases. So we all want to go towards a care that's preventive, besides being evidence-based. And we have challenges that it's growing as well. We have more chronic patients. We are having more multiple chronic conditions. We have reduced workforce within the healthcare sector. There are more pressure on the healthcare providers. So we need to make use of more data. And there are data held in silos within public sector units, within healthcare providers, data or digital health service and product providers. And we want to make use more of telehealth and mobile health solutions. The European health data space has several important dimensions to fulfill the aims of it. Now, even if we had a system or infrastructure that allowed sharing of health data, we still might face problems if the data quality is not adequate enough, especially when it comes to a clinical setting where we need to have a high fidelity, reliability, reproducibility, etc. of the data. Interoperability between the systems, subsystems, infrastructures within the countries of European Commission and the European member states, it's a problem. I mean, I know I have lived in many countries myself, and within the same country, sometimes the systems don't speak to each other. So even at the national level, we face problems of exchanging of health data. In order to actually work together, we need to collaborate and speak the same language. And this is not only human language, but the understanding of what we are doing. We need to have clear definitions and common grounds. Then it comes to the access. Data access, having worked with data for over 2 decades and in many medical and health projects, access has always been a showstopper. Always a problem, and that is the one that consumes a lot of time. Just to give you an example, for one of our projects recently, not to mention the country's name, but within Europe, it took us about 3 years to get actually access to the data. Well, that is actually a pretty long time, I must say. If you wanted to research and development and then going the regulatory path and then finally to come out with a product that can actually help the patient and help the clinicians who really want this, well, we need to speed this up. Let alone, we need to actually get the data that is of high quality and enough of the data to actually produce what we want to produce. Then comes the question of reimbursement. Well, reimbursement is very critical for the industry. I mean, we all in the private sector or where in entities, legal entities, we are dependent on actually making money. Well, we need to find a way of getting reimbursed for all the R&D work and all the products and services we create and provide. At the end of the day, this is also for the good of the people and population and for everybody. So we need to actually find a way that our products can be sold not only within the country where we have produced our solutions, but also to other countries. And being that we are in a very critical and highly regulated field, it's not that easy. And I give you an example. Recently, we developed a solution in Europe. It was to be used within the clinic, and then we wanted to market it in another country. And after 4 or 5 months negotiations with a very big healthcare provider, and we got finally access to the data, and we discovered actually we couldn't use the same solution because they had a different way of storing the data, collecting the data, and also their reimbursement system was different. So that is very critical to survive. Then comes the matter of privacy. So within Europe, privacy and the privacy of the citizens and the patients are extremely critical and important. And I am sure it is in other countries as well, just like in the US and some other places too. But here it is being, especially in the Nordics and Scandinavian countries, this is a topic that is constantly coming up when we talk about health data. And together with that is also the security of data. Knowing extremely in-depth information about a patient or about a citizen can be used very well in a very good way to help a patient's health, but it can also be used and misused very badly, causing a lot of harm. So these are the topics that the European health data space is taking seriously. And another one is actually the control by the citizen of their own health. And that is to support the mobility between the member states. We have almost no borders within Europe, so we can move around. You can take a car and drive down the hallway up and down, sometimes even without being checked for passports. So people move around here, and as naturally it is, people also get ill while they are abroad. So they need to see healthcare providers, they need to see medical professionals and experts to get help. And if they don't have their own data, it will be difficult to help them adequately, or they have to do all the experiments, all the tests, all the diagnostics as if they had done at home. But also sometimes there are other elements like allergies, etc., which the doctor might not be aware of, and the patient might not have given that before. So it becomes a complex situation and could be life-threatening. So the patients within the European health data space, the patients are supposed to be able to share their data with whom they would like to. And of course, there are certain rules for how you share this. So the problems, and now I'm focusing on the actual use of the health data. So we have got the primary use here. So we have the situation where the data is supposed to be shared by within the healthcare professionals and within the healthcare sector to help a patient. And it can happen that the healthcare providers have limited access or control over the patient's health data, so they cannot actually see the data of the patient. Or they have to do repeated tests, like mentioned earlier. And here, more exchange of data are needed. And we have to exchange the data, we need to have interoperability capabilities, which we don't have really currently. Then we have the data as well within the primary use case for products and services. So we try to create a single market. And here legislative frameworks need to be harmonized in order to actually allow these products and services to be marketed in the different sub-markets within Europe. We need to have a equal or a common standard for quality of health data. We often say we are data rich, but information poor. And that cannot help medical technology companies very much if the data is not information rich and the quality of data is not good enough. And then we need to set up the interoperability frameworks to actually develop and develop these products and services. And then we have the procedures for prescriptions, for example, and liability. How do you take into account the liability when these products and services, for example, something goes wrong? These are legal frameworks which need to be in place. Then we have the secondary use of the data. And here it's used for research and innovation and policy making. It would be much better, we could do a much better job if we had more access to more data. Currently, we have limited reuse of this health data, which could be extremely powerful if we had. The cross-border access is very, very difficult. And the infrastructures are actually quite fragmented within the member states of Europe, and sometimes even within the same national level. And then we all want to start using artificial intelligence because that is one area where we see we can deal with all the challenges that you can imagine we will face in the future. And there are a lot of situations right now we could do a much better job with AI than with just the traditional manual works. And that's the problem, or to not have access to the data, we have currently limited provision of AI-based product services. As I mentioned, in our case, 3 years for getting access to data. Well, if we had a quicker access to the data, we could have come out with our solutions, products and services much earlier for the benefit of the patients and also the healthcare providers. Besides the society, which could benefit from reducing resources and funds. Then we have difficulties for regulators to actually evaluate products and services when there is not enough real-world data or evidence coming from real-world data. And that also creates uncertainty in AI liability and in healthcare settings. Some critical elements of the European health data space. Well, there are many, but I have highlighted a few here. How do we govern? What governance system are we going to use in such a complex and giant infrastructure, where we try to share some extremely important, sensitive data, such as health data, within so many different countries, with so many different systems, so many different practices, standards, applications of application and interpretations of regulations. For example, the GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, where, for example, it's a certain situation, it's interpreted differently. And the AI Act, of course. So patients can share their electronic health record data with healthcare professionals or pharmacists in the visiting country and in the language of the healthcare professional. That is an important aim, which is making a big difference if that gives the trust to the patients that they can actually control their own data. The initial domains where the European health data space can be applied to patient summaries, e-prescriptions, laboratory results, hospital discharge reports. There will be and are some already rules on EHR exchange formats and some common technical specifications as a baseline. but there will be more and more coming. For example, the health level 7 and the DICOM standard, and new ones are coming as we go along. So according to the European Commission, the legislation will be built on 3 new pillars. This to create a strong system of data governance, improve and maintain good quality data, and strong infrastructure for interoperability. Now, the MedTech perspective of the European health data space. We all know that the MedTech medical technology industry is the center of the entire healthcare ecosystem. I don't think I have ever seen any healthcare provider where medical technology does not exist. We moved away from traditional medicine, man and women, many thousand years ago, and we constantly apply new technology. The importance of the European health data space for MedTech is to actually unlock the power of the larger and better quality sets of health data to create new and better medicines, meet unmet needs, for example, rare diseases, treat and understand diseases better, improved clinical trials, target medicine to the right patient and at the right time. And again, the insights from large amounts of data can help us with that. I have experienced that in some other projects we have had. And better evidence generation, real-world evidence generation for the products and services, which also could help regulators to make better regulations. The challenge for MedTech, like a company like ours, is the actual access to this data. So lots of data generated, but a lot of it is in silos. Difficulties to use, sometimes even their own company generated data because of regulations not allowing it. For example, consent has to be given to the new use of it. That makes some problems for advancing the R&D efforts. The fragmented approaches prevent medical technology companies to advance, and it's actually a showstopper. Fragmented systems is actually very difficult to deal with, and also besides requiring a lot of resources and time, it requires also dealing with a lot of different issues. For example, GDPR interpretations are quite widely applied in different ways. And also in the GDPR setting, there are some actually matters that are quite unclear about health data use for research and innovation. And then we have the question of anonymization and pseudonymization. Well, this still has to be discussed because sometimes the full anonymization is not that helpful for when we develop products and services. So, and also as technology develops and evolves, sometimes we could still identify certain elements which are not supposed to be identified. Of course, there are some rules for what you can do with data and which you cannot. Then we need the transparency, of course, and that is extremely important for gaining the trust of the population and patients. So how do we deal with data access? This is one of the most difficult questions, and this is discussed seriously and rigorously within the bodies, public bodies, and the European Commission to actually identify and find a way that is harmonized. We have, for example, the case of Finland, who is a frontrunner in enabling secondary use of health data, where they have involved a lot of different stakeholders. And this is always given as a good example. Maybe that's the route we could go. And then we have the situation where international collaboration is extremely important. The collaborations that we want to, for example, create with the US between countries in Europe. And of course, that will give us the advantage of also make use of the products and services and knowledge and skills that lay in both sides for the benefit of creating new products and services that could also be applied across the continents, which at the end of the day helps more people. So we need to also understand, I mean, the real world data is extremely important. I was recently at a public meeting about a month ago. In Denmark, we have every year something called Folkemødet. It's a public for a few day meeting where a lot of the party leaders, organizations, directors, key stakeholders are coming to discuss issues in the society. So I was in our debate, somebody asked what we thought or what I thought about the synthetic data. Well, I mean, synthetic data, of course, from the days when we discussed it many years ago, it has come a long way. But again, it depends on what problem you are applying it to and what your objectives are. So it is not enough with synthetic data, and we still need real world data. And with real world data, the bigger, the richer the insights, the potentially the better, and the use of it we can do. So data quality and how to ensure the data quality. Here, standards coming in place. Standards are extremely important in order to maintain a quality of data that's adequate enough for the medical and healthcare in medical and healthcare settings. And they have to be applied across the borders, especially for interoperability. We need to increase and reuse the acceptability of real-world evidence, especially for the regulators, for example. So if regulators and researchers, for example, use or start using real-world evidence more rigorously, it will also trigger increased demand for high-quality data. Data literacy and education is, of course, another element of the European health data space. If patients and citizens have access to their data and they want to understand their health better, and they need to understand why certain procedures were done this way, etc., they need to understand more about data. So it is another thing that, another aspect that needs to be worked on. And I am not sure whether the European Commission has any plans for that, but I think it's definitely something that's going to come into play as well within the European health data space. And trust, of course. We need to have good standards and a good governance in order to create the trust that we need in order to apply such a giant framework. And I mentioned earlier, reimbursement. We need to have different approaches for reimbursement. Products and services are extremely widespread. Use and application, consumption of it are extremely widespread. We cannot go one single way, so one size doesn't fit all. However, we need to have a harmonized way of doing it, getting reimbursed across the member states. And as I said, standards are extremely important. These are the building blocks of such a giant framework. Within the European space, there are member states who are much more advanced in digitizing their healthcare, while others are less. And that also requires that they boost up their digitization efforts. And there are actually funding available within the European Commission, many billions, in order to help member states to reach the adequate levels. And at the end of the day, we also need collaboration and harmonization of our systems in order to be able to deploy our products and services. So as a recap of the European health data space, this is one of the slides that we got presented by one of the European Commission delegates while we had a meeting at the CEN, European Standardization Organizations, about a month ago. So this basically explains and gives an overview of the European health data space. And I think that was all for me for this time. And if you would like to contact me, my email was at the beginning, and this is the company's email. If you have any questions or would like to talk to us, you're very welcome to talk to us. Send us an email. So thank you very much for listening. I hope that was informative enough to trigger some interesting questions.
Well, I think any one of those slides by itself would be enough for an hour discussion.
All right. Well,
every one of these is a topic of interest. I wish
yeah.
there's some people I wish were here today because they're sort of more specialized in some of these specific topics. But almost everything that you mentioned was something that's been brought up, and a lot of issues. I know John Rice is on the call. A lot of the legal and regulatory framework issues are ones that he's interested in, and we often don't talk about enough. Jim Sluka's on ISO standards committees, and of course Lucas is an AI expert. So we have a wide variety. Some people here have political, even in the small group, you have quite a range of nationalities and interests. So I will turn it over to the floor. I always have questions, but I always try to keep mine for the end. So please ask away. John, you've been very patient.
Yeah, I love this one, so thank you. There was one of your slides you had under interoperability, a parenthetical HL7 and DICOM. Can you just tell me what DICOM stands for?
DICOM. Sorry, my screen is messing up something here. Am I still sharing or? Hello?
No, you're not sharing anymore.
Okay.
You can take the screen share back. It's you if you like.
Yeah, it's like there were two primary efforts to utilize existing standards for the data interoperability, and just the DICOM was unfamiliar to me, and I'm curious, and somebody can send it later. And then the other thing is just a thank you, digital imaging and communications in medicine standard. Thank you, I got it. Jim Serkawt looked it up for us. So, and then the other thing was just a comment. You made reference to education.
Hold on, John. We lost our speaker.
Uh-oh.
I don't know if his battery ran out or his internet went out, but I think all of us could have a good discussion on these topics. It couldn't have been a better summary of the issues, could it? It's really elegant. You could tell he works with the government and in industry because it was so clear the way he laid things out. If we wanted a manifesto, we could borrow a lot of that. But we have to talk generally until he comes back, assuming he's able to come back.
Yeah, I'm trying to track down in the US if there's anybody that's looking at educating the general population to utilize electronic health record information. So, in high school health and PE, for some of the stuff that I've seen being taught, it seems terrible. It's really, I think, time that we begin to educate people about how you look at your own health record. And so he did make mention that the European community was recognizing the need to educate the patient general population. I can't find anybody here who's doing it.
Okay,
Why are hospitals not holding classes for people who want to learn how to look at their health record?
You think there'd be a lot of those? I don't know. Here he is. He's back.
Sorry, I don't know what happened. He just locked me out. So now I got back in. Sorry for that. So I think you had a question about DICOM and HL7. Wasn't that the case?
Yeah, we found it. Somebody looked it up while we were online and found it. So
Yeah.
I understand it's the digital imaging standard.
Yes.
And then my
actually,
other very, very short comment to you is acknowledging that the Europeans have recognized the need for education of the general public to how to use your electronic health record. That if we would begin teaching kids in high school health class, part of what you need to learn to do is look at your health record and spot problems. But more importantly, for where you guys are trying to go, that people really understand what the health record is well enough to make a decision about whether they want to share it or not. And I think right now, people just have not a clue in hell what that says in that health record. And so the answer is no, I'm not going to share it. I don't know what's in it, and I wouldn't understand it if I saw it. So working on public education is a great thing. Thank you.
well, thank you. Yeah. Yes, I wouldn't say that the DICOM standard is actually pretty good, quite well standardized and quite well used, including here in Denmark. And the education of the public, having attended these meetings, especially within this year, it's quite clear that actually people are very curious to understand more about their health data. And actually, this is critical. If you want to gain trust and make this system or the infrastructure to be to have a good success, people will need to be involved, and they can be involved first productively when they understand actually what the data says.
Okay, other questions? Again, I know we have people with interest in a lot of these areas, so. Lorenzo, please, go ahead.
Is he still around, Lorenzo? I can't see him.
Lorenzo,
Ah, okay.
you're there, but your sound isn't working. If you want, you can type it in the chat. Okay, he says, Jim, let's go to you, and then we'll come back with Lorenzo when he gets reconnected.
One of the challenges with John's idea of teaching people how to access their medical records in the US, it's a significant problem since there is no standard for medical data. Individual hospitals, individual doctors go out and buy a software package that handles their medical informatics. There's absolutely no requirement those are cross-compatible. If I change doctors tomorrow, everything I've learned about using my current doctor's website to get to my medical records will go out the window, and I have to relearn the whole system again. So I mean, the EU is a little bit more consistent about it, but the EU ballpark is about the same size as the US. And in the US, we're way, way, way behind on having anything that's shareable at all. And that's part of the reason I put in the chat earlier about moving some of the data into the patient's domain and out of the hospital's domain, the government domain, the insurance domain. In the US, HIPAA says the patient owns the data. It's very clear about that. The patient owns the data, full stop. So perhaps we need to move towards a system where when you get a clinical test done, it's deposited into your personal data set. And it must be compatible with your personal data set or you don't pay for the test. If the doctor wants the result, they must request it from your personal data set. As it stands now, if you have a specialist and a general practitioner, they can't see each other's data. Your dentist can't see your MD's data, right? Your eye doctor can't see your dentist data. So maybe the way to fix that is just, okay, it's the patient's data and give it to the patient. That, of course, is a huge burden for the patient. It also would make data sharing for mining and AI and things like that extremely difficult because the data would all be living with the patient. But anyway, so just some thoughts about maybe it should be the patients carrying their data around with them.
So may I ask, in the US, how the data that patient has access to, where is that stored and where was it generated?
Every doctor's office, hospital, lab, usually grouped by insurance company, has their own internal repository of data and typically a web portal to let you get into it. And that web portal, it's got your assay results. If the assays have been done, it's got scheduling information. Depending on the system, it may have the doctor's notes. It may or may not have imaging data. It may or may not have a CT scan, for example, which tend to be very big data sets. But that's the only way you can really get to your records. It's whatever that web portal gives you access to. And in the US, you run into problems like, if I go to a different lab and get my cholesterol measured in two different labs, it's unlikely I can line the reports up because they will use different descriptors for what the assay was. The numerical value might be the same, but they'll likely use different descriptors. In the US, your best chance is that the billing code for the insurance company is consistent. The doctors might call it different things, but to get paid, they got to pull the right code out of the billing codes. And that is a bit of a problem too. So basically in the US, it's a mess. It really is a mess. The data is a mess.
Now I got the time to have gotten really interested in my health record, and I find that my access to my data is marvelous right now because I've learned how to do it. But when I go for a doctor's visit and lab tests that are quick tests, I have the results before I get home. When I pull in the driveway, I can log on and I can actually read my physician notes. And then I send him notes about things that he said he saw that we didn't look at or talk about. It's like, wait a minute, you said in the notes that I have X. And I don't remember talking about X, and I don't know what X is. And I have a marvelous physician who is a believer in trying to use the electronic health records. And so we do communicate on it. It's possible. It's possible.
It is. But like I say, that if you change doctors tomorrow, you'll lose all that. If that new doctor is in a different health system,
yep,
it's gone. You're starting from scratch. The web portal will be different.
Yep.
Data that was there will all be gone.
Yep, that's the best insurance my doctor has, that I'm not leaving him. I wish I could be sure he wouldn't leave me.
Lucas.
Oh, yeah, thanks. So, yeah, I have a very specific question because you seem like the right person to ask about how to get access to certain data. So at my university, we all have these contact tracking devices. It's called the Safe Tripod, I guess. And I also looked up the company last year, and we all have to carry these devices. I think even some of our students carry them, and all employees, of course. And in principle, we have contact network data for maybe about 1,000 people at least, maybe even more. I don't know. And I always try to ask or find a way to get access to the data, because I guess some faculty members would be okay with sharing it. But the only answer that I received from our HR department that is basically controlling all these data sets is that they remove everything every 2 weeks, and there's no way to access it. And it would be fantastic for different kinds of research projects, not only for research that is COVID related. And so, yeah, you seem like someone who could maybe give another answer than everything will be removed after 2 weeks. So, yeah.
Right. Well, the one question first. Where are you based?
So our university is based in Germany, Frankfurt.
Okay.
So it's European data protection.
Oh yeah, GDPR. And is the data stored? Because there's a clear difference between personally identifiable information and also sensitive data.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know the data? What type?
Yeah, so it's our HR department. Each tracking device has an ID, and they can link IDs to specific people names. The data that is being stored separately in another list is a contact network that just lists connections between different IDs, not real names, right?
So it's pseudo-anonymized.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the data is collected for what purpose?
For the purpose of if someone tests positive, they will contact our HR department will contact all people that are listed as close proximity contacts.
And I am not expert in the German interpretation of GDPR, because GDPR can be and has been interpreted differently in different member states. I don't know how the GDPR has been interpreted by your organization, university, or even the German authorities or data controllers. So one way would be that you try to get information about what kind of how they have interpreted GDPR.
Right. So maybe I should. What I never did is I never contacted like every company or public institution, right? They all have to hire a data protection officer. I never contacted him. Maybe I should ask him about his interpretation, but they're usually not very helpful, I guess. I'm not sure.
Yeah, but the European legislation gives every citizen the right to request what data is held about him or her.
Okay.
So I remember even 20 years ago from my university, I sent in a request when I left. I needed to know what data they have on me, and I got quite a few boxes. Yeah. So you have the right to actually request.
Okay. At least my own data. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, other questions? I mean, we've been talking about data sharing primarily in education, but there are a lot of other topics that were mentioned of importance. Everything from how do you actually use AI in medical applications, which you mentioned doing a lot of AI, corporate AI work, but what can you apply AI? You talked about optimization, you talked about prediction. There are many contexts in which you could think of AI as being important. and they may raise different problems in terms of regulation, quality assurance, and so on.
Yeah. And one problem that I would like to mention, which we have actually started seeing that more and more, which has not been really an issue in the past, but it's becoming more and more an issue, is that when you create an AI system and the AI system starts becoming better and better than the human, then the human starts relying more and more on the AI system. So they are becoming less and less critical in their own works. Then something goes wrong, or should not go wrong. And that is because they started relying more and more on this AI system, which probably did not have such a big overview of such a big population that this patient that something went wrong for comes into the picture here. So, and that is one problem. We try to identify, and we work with different universities in different research works here, try to see how our AI systems are applied in medical settings for making critical decisions, how much, what is the actual interplay between the AI system and the actual human being. Because for us as a company, our vision is not to replace humans. Well, at least for another probably 200 years or so, for many years forward. And I've always said that. But to actually optimize processes. But how do you deal with an issue like this when the human being here is actually creating a problem because they start becoming more and more relaxed about their own critical thinking. And that is something we still have to work on.
Of course, this was an argument against seat belts and autopilots and right. I mean, the argument is maybe a little bit different, and you brought up liability, which is something we typically don't talk about. But there is the issue that if you have an automated system, and I guess I'm a techno-utopist, so I think human out of the loop is great if you can get to it. We talked about self-driving cars as an example.
Yeah.
But it's certainly true that even if at a population level, the death rate goes down enormously, or the injury rate goes down enormously, there will be individuals who will be harmed who wouldn't have been harmed under the old system. And so a liability framework, like maybe the one that's used for vaccines, where you also have a transfer of risk, where you have most people are better off, but a few people are worse off with treatment. That's a very complex political conversation to have, an important one. And I don't know how that's being handled, besides the kind of broad consultation that you mentioned happening in Denmark. I wish that kind of thing happened here.
Tom there. Yeah, so what I'm thinking of is that in the case of autopilot, where you push a button and you rely, although you are not supposed to take off your hands over steering wheel, for example, or be totally relaxed about let the car, for the moment at least, to drive by itself. But here we are talking about the decision-making process of the clinician that affects critical thinking and affects somebody else's life. And that is, I find, is more complex than, for example, if I decide to rely on my autopilot or not to have the seatbelt on, etc. So,
so you're talking about changes in social behavior as opposed to necessarily in individual behavior.
Exactly.
That people become to rely. Well, of course we do. People have stopped reading maps. because they're used to being able to use navigation, online navigation. Two-factor authentication. What happens if your phone doesn't work?
Yeah.
I mean, there are many situations like this, I think, where we don't always even realize that we've lost autonomy. Try to buy something when the internet doesn't work in a store. Try to check into an airline when they've lost their reservation system. And so those maybe are more second level. But I think the point though about individual choice is still important, because you are in a life critical situation.
Yeah, especially as my decisions affect others, and that is we haven't yet found a legal framework of liability that could take into account such complex situations.
Well, but something that, the examples that are always brought up would be pacemakers and digital pancreas, artificial pancreas, both of which the device is having to make decisions on a timescale that means you have to have human out of the loop. And so are there lessons? I don't know the details of the regulation in those two cases, and maybe are there lessons from those two medical device examples that could be generalized?
Yeah, still to be discussed, I think.
I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but I mean, it seems that to me that those are cases where, and again, it may just be that my personal vision is, you mentioned that we don't have Gary on the phone, right? You talked about using information and these technologies to do better prognosis, therapy specification. But really, the great opportunity is closing the loop and having control. And to have control, you have to have also delivery, automated delivery of the therapy. And that's human, ultimately is human out of the loop. To begin with, you can do open loop or human in the loop. But ultimately, if you want these technologies to have the transformative impact you talk about so convincingly at the beginning, you have to have human out of the loop. And so it's interesting that I'm wondering, is that being talked about? It must be being talked about. Or is that it's already so hard to do human in the loop that you don't even want to think about it?
Sorry, what is the question actually? I don't get it.
Well, you talked about this issue of loss of autonomy, loss of agency.
Loss of agency.
Agency. And you talked about the dichotomy between loss of agency of an individual and a change of style of operation, where you come to depend on an assistance. And you were making a distinction between those two cases.
What I was saying is that the issue when our AI systems within a clinical setting are getting better and better than the humans. So what happens, the change of behavior of the clinicians, that they start relying on it more and more and stop being critical as they are normally. So things can go wrong.
Because they assume that the system works.
Exactly. And this is a complex legal framework, because who is liable for if something goes wrong? And we haven't yet found a convincing or a final liability setting or framework that can deal with such situation. But I mean, it is of course if we deliver the system, they have to agree to certain conditions and what they have to do, what don't they have to do, etc. But I mean, this is a way of dealing with it. But the human behavior of being changed because of the AI system, and especially when my behavior, say for example in a hospital, can affect somebody else's life, and the liability issues here. So I find this is complex. So.
Well, and I mean, you yourself have been involved in something that has an effect of this kind, which are blood oxygen clips, right? And the patient who's hospitalized now, they have a blood oxygen clip. And so nurses now rely on that reporting to their central stand to monitor the patient. If there's a failure, then there's an issue. Now, the failure should at least give a warning that there's been a failure. But that was something that didn't exist, right? We didn't have that 35 years ago. And so that in general, it's given a tremendous boost because you don't check to see if the patient is alive every 5 hours. You know more or less immediately if they're alive between an EKG and blood oxygen. On the other hand, there's been some discussion that blood oxygen clips aren't reliable, for example, with people with very dark skin, or in certain other subpopulations. And again, I'm not trying to be combative. I think these are. I'm trying to understand more because you've raised so many issues. I mean, one issue that comes up, which is a sort of a hobby horse of mine, and we're running out of time, which this particular issue brings up, is transfer.
Sorry, did you say hobby versus?
The hobby horse means the audience, who fortunately not too many left, have heard me complain about this too many times, so they're going to be unhappy to hear me say the same thing again. But is transfer of control. And so when systems are automated and they fail, the standard engineering approach is to return control to the human being. Right? You're in a self-driving car, the system is fine, it's driving along. Something happens that the system doesn't recognize, and it says to the driver, now you're in charge. Typically, this happens in a crisis, and the last thing that the driver has the ability to do is to handle the transfer of the system he's in, changes its behavior at a moment of crisis. I think this issue that you brought up is not unique to medical practice.
No, certainly not. No.
And I think it would be interesting to hear even just a word or two, if you worked in the area, for example, self-driving cars, how do you begin to address that issue in these other contexts, and what can you learn in a medical context from that?
Yes, and actually, if you think about when it comes down to the bottom line, it's very similar. Again, critical thinking, relying more on the machine, even though that, well, you might be not alone in the car, for example, in the car situation, and you might be crashing into somebody else. Again, other people's lives are involved. And I think it might be, if the car industry have found this way of dealing with this or solution, we could probably bring it into the clinical setting. Yes. And I think that there are a lot of good lessons to be learned here from different sectors. How do we deal with this? And I think it could be very interesting to collaborate with some partners who have found, unfortunately, I left that field almost 2 decades ago, but it will be very interesting because they develop and evolve very quickly, and its bottom line is very similar.
That was, I'm sorry if I didn't make it clear. My point from the beginning was exactly this, that it seems to me that many of the issues, and you mentioned yourself that you want to bring in the European directive is trying to bring in as much expertise from other sectors and other applications as possible. And so the particular issue you raised here seemed to me to be one that had many analogies in life-critical, non-medical situations.
Yes. And then, but the thing is that within the healthcare and medical sector, it has been, we all know, it's been untouched for many thousand years, if you could say that. So it has been traditionally more traditional. And that's why you face more sort of discussions about issues. So, but there are actually a lot of good lessons to be learned from other sectors, because they also, at the end of the day, will deal with human lives. Yeah.
Well, I think we should let you get to your holiday now.
Yes, I
Stayed
think
longer
it's
than
time.
you, and I appreciate it very much. I think there were some good questions, and we really appreciate your patience with us.
Well, thank you very much for the invite, and thank you for all the questions, the great discussions. Hopefully one day I could also do a presentation about the clinical work we do.
We would love to have that. You're welcome anytime. As I said, any one of your slides would be more than enough for an hour discussion. So you could come back.
Maybe we should go down
19 times. You could come back 19 times and give 19 talks, and we would learn from each one of them.
I appreciate kind words. Thank you.
Myself or Joel, your best timing, and we will be happy to arrange.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Lorenzo, where are you sitting, by the way?
In my office, which is also my living room.
And
In
which
London.
is
One of my offices, which is also my living. Before I was in a train, that's why I was not so interactive. I was coming back from my other office.
Okay, so you are all in the US.
No, Lorenzo's in the UK.
Oh, you are in the UK. Okay.
Yeah. I live in the UK. Yes.
Okay.
No, it's you had the audience was not large, but it was quite international.
Great. And Joel is where?
I'm from Brazil, but I'm here in the US.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Lucas, where are you these days? Are you in Germany or the US?
So I live in Zurich, and I'm just going to Frankfurt for teaching and a few meetings sometimes, and always traveling back and forth. Yeah.
And Itamar, where are you based?
I'm in Toronto, Canada. I still have a question.
Okay, well,
Out of line and may offend some people here. I maintain that we have lost privacy when computers were introduced to the world. Now, the question is whether I have certain medical condition, if it's becoming public, what the damage to me? And the damage could be by some people socially will look down at me. Some insurance company will charge me more, and they do, because I don't lie on the questionnaire. Some employer will not take me, and so on. However, that's nothing to do so much with me embracing and guarding my privacy. It's more a problem of the organizations that should be more disciplined not to abuse my privacy. And the question is, where is the political will to quench that once and for all? Because for the layman, privacy is some kind of illusion that they hang to because they say, oh, I am a private citizen. However, all this European GDPR, I heard we have officer in Ontario that is advocating privacy and making career and business out of it. However, it's all big bubble. Sorry if I'm too aggressive. I'm not playing hockey, but I'm still Canadian.
Yeah. What was your question, by the way?
The question is why the governments and the big organization don't or want or are not capable to discipline themselves not to abuse privacy to their advantage. It's a question that has to do like why government cannot quench the underworld. All the technology and power they have, still they don't do that.
I mean, to be honest with you, I could answer this by saying to every coin, there are two sides. Unfortunately, I mean, even if a government wanted to quench that, it would be still difficult, unfortunately.
Of course, there is resistance to any change.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure. I don't mean only resistance, but the bad side might not be as easy to deal with. And there are many elements why it's not easy to deal with this. I'm not expert in this field, but privacy is something very important, of course. And that's within the European health data space, or within Europe, we put a lot of weight on that.
Of course, but maybe it's time to revise it and to reconsider it, because it is an illusion. If the CIA wants to know everything about you, they will know it in no time.
How is that dealt with in Canada, by the way?
Pardon?
How is privacy dealt with in Canada?
Well, you know, we adopt, I don't know how it's dealt, but we adopt a lot of influences from outside, and we are very soft. Sorry, I didn't answer your question because I'm not qualified to answer it.
But I think, Itamar, your starting point was the following, that it's not the collection of the data or even the fact that the data are disclosed that's the issue. It's how people use those data to discriminate against you after they're disclosed.
Abuse it.
And the problem is that making decisions, I think the Serkawt's comment was that the problem is that if you're going to make decisions that can help you, there's also going to be the possibility of using the same data to make a decision that's adverse. Because the decision about what's helpful or adverse may be dependent on the point of view. If you're an insurer and you have a high probability of a genetic disease, well, the insurance company could say we charge people with that condition more. That helps people who don't have the condition. It hurts people who do. Does the government allow that or not? Does the government compensate people or not? Those are fundamentally political decisions about how you respond to the presence of information that didn't exist. And you started out by saying, as soon as information exists, it'll be used. And so I thought actually your analysis of the problem was very clear. And it's not so simple to decide how to do these things. There are legitimately different points of view, I think.
When you go to buy insurance, you fill a questionnaire and you have to declare that everything is correct. If it's not correct, the policy is null and void. So where is my privacy here? I mean, I don't need to guard my privacy only when it comes to applying it, and then I reveal it anyway. If I go to the emergency room and I don't disclose everything I feel or I know about me, I'm damaging myself.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, I honestly don't have an answer, but what I said is that why does the government doesn't take privacy more seriously? There might be many elements to that, and I am not expert on that. I cannot answer, but I know that certain governments take it more seriously and deal with it. Certain are not, or dealing with it different way. And there are always two sides to the coin. So without the full picture, I honestly don't know. And I feel very sorry that you face such misuse of the privacy. And I really hope that there will be a way forward.
We all have to be optimistic, yes. And thank you for your presentation and trying to answer after I define the question.
Well, thank you.
But
Thank you
for
attending.
example, we have LCBO, which is run by the government, selling alcohol to everybody. In the same time, we have so many addicted people. So what are the two sides of this coin? Meaning the government has like a implicit tax here, indirect tax via controlling the alcohol, but supplying it in huge amounts. And recently also with marijuana and other drugs. So I put a big question mark on the big powers and their policies. But it may be that I'm the only one.
Well, I think that's worth another day's worth of discussion. I don't think we're already over time by 15 minutes. I don't mean to cut off the discussion. I think these are important points, but I think for today we'll have to give you the last word and say that this issue of agency and privacy are fundamental problems that need to be discussed more, and that they certainly come up in a medical context in unavoidable ways. And so with that, I will thank you again, all of you, for the discussion and the time. And I will draw the meeting for today to a close. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you very much for the invite and for the discussions, for the questions. Yeah, we'll be in touch.
Thank you.
All right. Best wishes.